Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and today we have a special interview with Roger Parrott, president of Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi. And he's written an amazing book that I'm going to just say resonates with me 100%. It's called Opportunity Leadership, Stop Planning and Start Getting Results. Let me tell you, if you're in a situation where you're being planned to death, if people want you to plan farther and farther and farther into the future, he's going to give you some keys that will help completely change that way of thinking, make you more spontaneous, make you more original, make you reactive instead of constantly planning in the future. Planning is great, but we can overdo it, and I know many leaders who do. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. Roger, I'm thrilled that you're here. Let me just start this interview by saying I've wanted to do this interview since I first got a copy of the book. And I have to say, just for everybody watching or listening, the book is Opportunity Leadership, and that got my attention. But what really grabbed me was the subtitle, which is Stop Planning and Start Getting Results. I'll tell you, you are singing my song. So first of all, I'm grateful that you'd come on. Thank you so much.
Well, this is an honor for me, and thank you for your encouragement about the book. You know, I mean, you're an example of this. Look at all the things you've done in your life, and I bet if we trace them down, they weren't planned. God opened up one opportunity after another, and you had the courage to walk through the door, and good things happen when we do. But we're all stuck in this planning thing that's really hurting us. So that's why I wrote the book.
That's so true. Well, you know what? I lead a production company, Cooke Media Group, here in Los Angeles. Right. And we're media producers. We've been all over the world shooting stuff and filming things. So I'm the creative guy. I'm the writer, the producer, the director. And meetings are planning is like meetings for me. I hate them. I just hate them. And everywhere I work, there's some employee who thinks meetings are an important part of his job and schedules them all the time. And I think planning is very similar. I mean, what was the trigger point for you? When did you start thinking, oh my gosh, this planning thing's getting out of control?
Yeah. Well, I was a traditional long-range planner, and I do want to differentiate the beginning that I'm talking about long-range planning, predicting destinations. So we work really hard at the university to plan what we know God's already given us. So we know we're going to play football, we're going to teach English, we're going to run residence halls. We plan that very well. What we don't plan is where God's going to take us. We don't plan the new things. So if you come to our website, we're like the only school in the country that does not have a long-range plan. You won't find one. There's no Belhaven 2025 or Belhaven 30. It came after 20 years of doing planning and realizing how unproductive it was, but it really came through an opportunity I had to be with the president of Samford University. We were having trouble when I first came to Belhaven over the issue of planning with our accreditors, and I asked him to come talk to us. He happened to be chair of the whole accreditation process. He's in my conference room with his vice president for planning. He's got a guy, this is his only job. And he says in front of him, he says, I don't think anything significant that's happened to our university we planned. It all came through opportunities. And it triggered the light in me, and off to the races we went. And we haven't looked back, and we haven't had a plan since then. It's been the best decision I ever made as a leader.
Well, I worry that there's some people that are going to have heart attacks when they read this book, because I know people that live to plan. That's all they ever do. And the farther out, the better. I know pastors that have the next 5 years of their sermons already planned out. But I can tell you from my perspective, we live in a culture that's changing every minute. I mean, it's amazing just how quickly change is happening. And years ago, I wrote a book called Jolt, Get the Jump on a World That's Constantly Changing, to help people prepare for all that accelerated change. So it's really impossible to plan very far out anymore.
It really is. I mean, anybody who had a plan 3 years ago doesn't have one now. I mean, nobody had COVID in their plan, not one person. And so that's kind of a softball illustration, but it's true. But look what happened with COVID. When we couldn't have a plan to execute, we were innovative. We took risk. We made decisions faster. We brought the key people together, and instead of tons of meetings, we implemented. Lots of good things happened in how we operate. Now that that's kind of past, we're saying, well, let's get back to the planning table. No, don't do it. Stay with what you got. But I will say, if it's a leader's in an organization where planning is expected, they've always done it. You can't just kind of jump into this opportunity leadership overnight, or you're going to get fired. You got to kind of tip your toe into it, get going with it, and move toward it. But that's where the opportunities come about. And a big one that really relates so much to what you do. I mean, Belhaven University is the leading Christian university in the country in the arts, and we're one of only 36 schools in America nationally accredited in all four of the major arts: music, theater, visual art, and dance. Plus, we have film. We have creative writing. We've done a lot of good stuff. We never planned any of that. God opened one door after another, and it never would have happened if it had been a plan. But by trusting God for opportunities instead, we've been able to put out hundreds of these great artists in all kinds of fields that we never would have touched it if you'd gone to traditional planning. And that's where traditional planning stops us. We're not getting God's best. Yeah, we're doing some good things, but we're settling for far less than God's best.
Okay, so let's help people that are getting the shakes right now, watching and listening to this. You have a section in the book that I absolutely adore called "Why We Allow Empty Planning to Fill Our Time," and you have some reasons in there. We plan to please board members. We assume planning equals leadership. Tell me about that one. That's an interesting one to me.
And I think it's a lot of the pressure. I mean, our boards do expect it, whether that's a church board or whether that's a ministry board or a corporate board. They expect that because that's their world. That's where they feel like they can give a tangible result. And so we do it out of expectation when we know it doesn't do any good or minimal good.
Yeah.
But as a side note to that, one thing I will say about planning is, you notice how it focuses on what we don't have? Opportunities focuses on what we do have. And
That's
so
good.
I think a lot of ministries are grumbling about what they don't have because they're focused on their plan. But that's what boards want. They assume donors want it. When I got rid of planning, I've raised so much more money than I ever raised before because my donors love I got an opportunity. And I talked to a donor this morning for about a major gift. And I said, this just came up. This opportunity came. We didn't plan this. And he said, that's the kind of thing I want to give to you. So, but I think there's this assumption that that's how we provide leadership. We run this structured planning process, and that shows I'm in charge. And so leaders are really afraid to walk away because what do I do as a nonprofit leader? What do I do other than raise money? Well, what you do is you change the culture. What you do is you equip people. What you do is you facilitate everybody using their best gifts, and you facilitate the ability to respond quickly when God's wind blows, and it does wind blow. But, we're stuck in this thing of a bunch of stuff that doesn't work, one of which is, only do what you can measure. I think that's just crazy, just nuts. The things that matter most, we can't measure. And especially in God's world. So, when you get rid of the excuses, God just opens up the doors.
Well, which leads us to the number 4 on that list, which is we believe leaders are the keepers of order, structure, equity, and process. And it's interesting that I when I teach leaders about communication and working with creative teams and leading creative people, I always tell them I have two different structures. I have the organizational chart and I have what I call a communication chart. Mm-hmm. And the organizational chart's important, and we need to know who reports to who and who answers to who and those things. But when it comes to communication, you can't go through that organizational chart, because if you have a lowly graphic designer working on a new logo, and he's got to get a sign off from 7 people on the way to the ultimate boss who will sign off on it, that logo is not going to look anything like it started with, and it'll take 9 months to do it. And so in when it comes to communication, you need to be much more free flowing and flexible. And that's what kept coming to mind as I read this part. Most leaders feel like they're keepers of order and structure, and they're not as flexible as they probably should be under your thinking.
Yeah, and you got to change the culture to love it. I mean, I go to anybody. I just was with one of our maintenance guys on a decision. I didn't go through the 4 layers to get to what he's got to work on. We just got together and fixed it in about 3 minutes. You got to create a culture, or people get threatened by that. And at our place, we talk about functional lines of authority. And that means you can go to anybody you want to, where there's a functional need, and pull together whatever group you need to, connect to whoever you need to. And we're not going to get bugged about you don't go through hierarchy. But boy, there are a lot of organizations that really get bugged about that. And you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got a logo designer, got to go through 7 levels. I hate to see what the logo is going to look like after that.
Exactly.
All the creativity is going to be out of it. That's for sure.
we have a client right now that's a very large nonprofit that I happen to be good friends with the founder. And so it's easier for me to give him a call with a question about something we're doing for them. Maybe it's a short film or a video. But boy, his people hate that. They just hate it. I mean, they just get so angry with me for calling the boss, even though we're friends. And I didn't go through them. They get really bent out of shape. So I might be slipping a few of these books to them.
It really is hard, but there's got to create a culture where they're comfortable with that. And, I'm involved in everything on my campus, absolutely everything. But I'm very clear. I'm not a micromanager. What I am is micro aware. So when I can be aware of all the stuff that's going on, then I can be ahead of problems, ahead of issues, bringing the right people together. So I think a team has to get comfortable with that the CEO is going to be micro aware of whatever's going to happen. And they need to get over it, because they're holding themselves back if they're bugged that you're going to the boss.
Now, you have an interesting illustration of the difference between, from a leadership perspective, the difference between being a baseball manager and a football coach. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we have become enamored in American leadership of football coaches, and I'm here in the Deep South, and, the SEC and Nick Saban's and all that stuff. And football coaches are, and so we lift these people up as that's the way to lead. I think it's absolutely the wrong model, because football coaches are about control. They're about preciseness. They're about time constraint. They're about team synchronization. They're about a predetermined plan. I mean, when we kick off next week, my coach will have the first 20 plays drawn out, and that's what's going to happen. And they're about winning every game. You can't lose if you're a football coach in SEC, more than one game, maybe 2, or you've had a horrible season. Yeah. Baseball's completely different. Baseball rewards anticipation. A baseball manager is reactionary to what's happening, encourages personal ingenuity, is supporting flexibility, understands the interwoven purposes of each of those players, and they can lose about 30% of their games and still win the World Series. Yeah. So, but here's to me, the really big takeaway is this. You ever notice when you're watching a game on TV, when the pressure's on in a football game, the camera always goes to the coach, because everything is built around that coach. In a baseball game, when the pressure's on, the camera goes to the player. And we as leaders need to turn the camera around, get it off of us. We want to make it all about us. That's part of why we do this thing. Yeah. Get the ego out of it. Don't make it about us. Make it about the people who actually implement this thing. I just met with my student leaders for the semester, and I said, you do the mission of this place. I don't get to do that. I can run the finances and I can do other stuff, but you're the ones on the front. You're going to be there when a student's upset because something bad happened at home at 2:00 in the morning. You're going to be there when somebody flunks a test, or when somebody is the star of the game. You're going to be the ones on the front line. We as leaders need to build them up and get the camera off of us. And that's why I like this model of baseball coaches, which is managers, which is much more flexible. They're kind of in the corner of the dugout. You don't see them a lot, but they're making this thing happen with the strengths of their players rather than it all being about them. We just love that model.
I've never thought of it that way, but it makes perfect sense. It kind of reminds me of that legendary Ritz-Carlton customer service rule, where any employee of a Ritz-Carlton can spend up to $2,000 to fix a problem for a customer. Yeah. And they don't have to get a sign off. They don't have to get permission from anybody. They can just spend up to $2,000 to make something right for a customer. And I'm so, I've always been impressed with giving the employees the opportunity and the freedom to go fix stuff on their own. And it's a big reason why Ritz-Carlton has such a fantastic reputation out there.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the money, it's about the authority that they have. And it's about the empowering of them and trusting them to make good decisions. Our people will make good decisions. We as leaders don't have to sign off on everything. They really will make good decisions. And I bet those people who have that $2,000 limit are a lot more careful than some of their bosses might be at throwing money at the problem.
and they're on the front line, so they know how to fix the problem better than the boss does anyway. All right, so you have a leader to implement this kind of thinking. A leader's got to be pretty comfortable with risk because there will be things that go wrong. How do you encourage leaders when it comes to dealing with risk?
Yeah, I think it's a huge issue for the Christian world, especially because we don't like things that don't work out. And part of that is our theology. We when we start something new, we say, well, God called us to this, and we pray that God will bless it, and then it doesn't work. Well, did we not hear God, or did God fall, or what happened? So instead of fixing it, or stopping it, instead of stopping it, we start something new on top of it to try to fix the problem. We've got to be able to stop stuff. And sometimes what I have found, and I've had a lot of things that start and don't work. And what I found is I always learned something in that was preparing us for something more important later on. And so you got to build that into the culture of people getting comfortable with risk, and then understanding that you got to flex with the implementation, because there's this idea in planning that we got to predict every problem that could come out, every contingency. We got to never be surprised, and then we're good leaders. No, what we do is we make decisions and we go, and we know what's going to come out is going to look different. You do that in your creative work all the time.
Absolutely.
You start a project and you have a vision of what it's going to be, and the end thing, I'm sure, comes out very, very differently than what you expect. And that's where good things happen. But boy, we don't want to do that in planning, because somehow we feel like we failed if we couldn't predict the whole future.
Which is insane. It's just insane. I mean, there's no way to predict the future. Even when the Lord is leading us, he sees what's out there. I don't see what's out there. And I've just got to be ready to adjust, change the sails, tack in a different direction. What about speed? This will speed up an organization, I would assume. This will make things happen, right?
Well, the only way to do this is to go fast. And there's another huge problem. I mean, the planning process is so slow. I was interviewing a faculty member once, and I was telling him about how we don't do planning and how we adjust and people make their own decisions, and on we go. And he said, I've been working at my campus for 7 months to change the name of a course. I've gone through 5 committees, and it's still not done. And then he said, and I don't care anymore. and that's kind of how it is. So we're all about speed. You got to build a culture that is comfortable with speed. And so we have been doing this long enough that we can move very, very fast. We started in late November a doctorate in China in Mandarin for business, a doctorate in business with the leading school in China, the number 1 rated school, the Harvard of China. And we made that decision over a weekend. That wasn't hard to do, because we had a culture where we know what we're good at. We know when we're not good at something, and when it fits, we go very, very fast. And
that's really good.
We miss, for some reason, leaders think they're fishing in a lake. You're not fishing in a lake, you're fishing in a river, and that water is going by. And by the time you get ready to throw it out there, it's a whole different environment.
Yeah.
And they go so slow, they can't get anything done. You got to jump in and go. And sure, it's not going to be right from the start, and that's okay. That's part of it, but you got to go.
Tell me a little bit give me some encouragement for leaders of small organizations, ministries, nonprofits, businesses, because in those organizations, the smaller you get, the bigger deal that decision becomes. If you're a huge organization, if you're Apple, for instance, you can make a lot of bad decisions and it's not going to hurt your bottom line. But if you're in a smaller organization, it really becomes painful if you've made a mistake. What would you say to encourage leaders of smaller organizations?
Yeah, measure every opportunity by 3 criteria: mission, gifting, and capacity. So know your mission so well that you're not tempted to do things you're not really good at. figure out what God's called you to do that nobody else can do. And there's some small ministries and some small churches who can do things that nobody else can do. Take advantage of that mission. So know your mission. And in the book, I asked some pretty tough questions about mission, starting with what's the worst that happens if you go out of business? Because if we can't answer that one, we really don't have business being in business. So deal with the mission question so you know that mission. And then I look at mission and then gifting. What are we good at doing? And at Belhaven University, we know what we're good at doing. We really do well in online programs. We really do well in the arts. We really do well in high-level service to students who live on campus. We know what we're good at, and then we stay in that arena. And then our capacity. And sometimes we got capacity to take on more, and sometimes we're kind of all filled up, and we don't, have you got the right team, the right people who can do it? Fortunately, through the years, I've been able to build a team who understands this, lives it, and they're very, very flexible, and they can move overnight, literally overnight. And so, but you look at mission, gifting, and capacity. You don't look at a flow chart. You don't look at a whiteboard of all the pluses and minuses. To understand mission, gifting, and capacity, and then it becomes really clear. Does this fit? Does it fit? And sometimes you start, and if it doesn't work out, after all, God is in charge. And if God's really in charge, he'll either using it to teach you something to prepare for something else, or it's going to be successful in a way probably different than you expect it to be.
Now, you have a chapter on embracing roadblocks. Tell me a little bit about that. Why is it important for a leader when you're thinking, with opportunity leadership, when you're thinking in this mode? Why is it important to embrace roadblocks or get to like them?
Yeah, as leaders, we got a real problem with roadblocks. I mean, it's like when the roadblock comes, okay, now I'm going to prove I'm the leader. I'm going to go bust this thing wide open. And that's where I'm going to show my muscle, my power, my strength, my experience. I'm going to make this happen. I think we're doing it wrong. I think we've got to learn to love roadblocks understand what is God saying. When he blocks something, there's a reason for it. God's no is as good as God's yes. And so if God said yes to something, we say, oh, isn't this wonderful? God's in charge. God blessed us. God says no. We need to say, isn't this wonderful? God's blessed us. God's in charge. It's the same outcome. God protects us from certain things or is saving us for something else. I just had a big deal that we had worked on to provide prison education in Mississippi. This state has a higher incarceration rate than any place in the world, not just in the United States, any place in the world. And we had an opportunity to go into the 4 largest prisons of the state and provide education. And we got turned down by the federal government for doing it. And when it happened, my team, the initial reaction, all of us was disappointment. And I said, God's in charge. He's protecting us. And we celebrated that we couldn't do it because, there are times God says no. But here's what happens in roadblocks. It's kind of like I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and out in the West during those years. When they would log the timber, they would cut down the trees, down to the river, and they strap them together and they float them down the river. It's cheaper than getting trucks. So you'd see these huge log things coming down, but sometimes they get jammed up. And when they get jammed up and then one group of logs builds on another, it can almost stop up the river. And so when it happens, and this is the analogy of leadership, when it happens, you got 3 choices. The first is if you're a really skilled lumberjack, you can go out there with a gigantic steel pole and try to pry it loose, but you can break your leg or you can get killed in the process. And a lot of leaders are going in trying to break the log jams, and they're getting wounded in the process. The second thing you can do that you did in the Pacific Northwest is you can blow it up. You can go in and literally put dynamite in it and blow it up. And a lot of times leaders will do that. They'll just blow it up and let it come out where it comes out. But the third thing you can do is just wait. And if you wait, those logs rub against each other until eventually they'll nearly always clear themselves. And what I've learned as leaders in leadership is when I hit those roadblocks, if I just wait, God will usually clear the way for something to happen that makes that possible. And I just got news a couple of days ago. There may be an opening for us to get back into those prisons. We just waited. God may have opened a door. We'll see. But either way, God's answers are the right answers.
I resonate with that so much because I've often told people that in my case, God doesn't open doors, he shuts them. So I'm trying all kind of stuff. I'm trying this, I'm trying that, I'm going over here. And usually it's a case of him shutting all the doors that I would do something horrible in. And so I totally get what you're talking about. It's kind of like, I remember that legendary quote from boxer Mike Tyson, who said, every fighter's got a plan until that first time you get hit in the face.
Yeah.
And the plan goes right out the window.
Yeah.
And so that's really, really true. So,
and I think especially talented leaders have to be sensitive to that. As you've said, it feels so right, because you've got all these gifts, all these things you could do. It's tempting to just go into a whole bunch of stuff. And sometimes you just do that to see what sticks and what works, and you get a bunch of stuff going. But trust God on those open doors and celebrate them. And that's terrific. And that's, I think, why God's blessed you so much.
That's interesting. That's fascinating. Well, let's go back for just a minute. You talk about, you mentioned a number of times creating the culture where this is going to be acceptable, where it's going to work. How do you go about, give us leaders out there some tips on what you did there to create a better culture where this kind of thinking works?
Yeah, for us, I had to get it in an image. Now, I'm in Mississippi. We're storytellers, so you got to have a story. You got to have an image in Mississippi. And, if you come on my campus, if you talk about opportunity leadership, probably most won't know about it. But if you talk about powerboats and sailboats, they will all know about it. And that's the image we use. We want to be a sailboat prepared to catch the wind of God and go wherever God's wind takes us, rather than a powerboat that goes where we think God wants us to go and ignores the wind. And in the Christian world, we've got really good at building some mighty impressive powerboats, to go where we think God wants us to go, but they do ignore the wind. And so we take that image, and it comes down to, in a sailboat, what do you trust? Do you trust the motor, or do you trust the wind? And we're trusting the motor of our organizations too much, rather than the wind of God. It comes down to focus. When you're in a powerboat, you just got to look at the gears, look at the controls, look at the direction, off you go. When you're a sailboat, you got to be sensitive to what's going on around you and the wind and how the boat's interacting with the water and all this stuff. It's about preparation. I've got a powerboat. You just jump in, turn on the motor, and off I go, and I can fish. In a sailboat, you got to get it ready. You got to spend all kinds of times. Sailors I know spend more time getting ready than they ever do sailing. And that's part of what this is. So we have this image, and there are other pieces of that help people to grasp the difference. But the culture comes by helping people to really get their arms around letting go of this leadership, this planning process. And I call it, first of all, you got to have the desire. You got to have the desire that what you're doing is not working. You're willing to change. And then you got to inspire for more. We're settling for less than God's best. It's not that we're out of God's will. We're settling for less than his best. So we've got to desire more. And then we got to retire. We got to retire that planning process. And that's not a jump off the cliff thing, or really you will get fired. It's a process that's slow, and it takes some time. It takes some art. And one way I encourage leaders to do it is go back over the last year, see what significant has happened, and make a list. Did it happen by planning, or did it happen by opportunities? And I almost guarantee every time it came by opportunities. And then you got to aspire to something different. And starts with, like any corporate culture change, starts with a small group. You empower them, early adopters, they get it. You get on, you show success, you celebrate that, and eventually everybody's on board. My campus doesn't even ask about a long-range plan anymore. They're all comfortable with how we do it. But it took us 20 years to get there.
That's amazing. So what have we left out? If there's one thing you'd like to get across to people about the new book, what would you say?
It takes a theology of trust. And we all believe God is sovereign. We all preach it. We're pretty good at preaching it. That God is sovereign. God's all in charge. God's over all. But we don't lead that way. Too often in ministry, we lead like God threw us the keys of the car, and we're supposed to go drive. We're supposed to go do it, and we're responsible to him, but it's on us. It's not on us. God is sovereign in everything. So let's let him lead and let him guide. And when we do, there is such a freedom in this. It is such a joy to lead. I'm coming out of COVID and all the financial issues of that and the educational issues and whatever. And I'm pretty relaxed about it because God's got this. His name's on the marquee, not mine. And if this place goes, it's on him. And he's got this. thankfully, and we're built on a solid bedrock foundation of stuff that'll stand up to the test, and we can do it. And so, when people have a theology of trust, they really live out in leadership, not just preach. There is a great joy and freedom in leadership they never thought was possible. Let go of the burden and let God lead it.
Thank you. That was amazing. Well, the book is Opportunity Leadership. Stop planning and start getting results. We'll put all the information in our show notes so people can order it and get it and get in touch with you. Where is the place to get in touch with Roger? How should people get in touch with you?
Belhaven.edu with one L, BELHAVEN, or president@belhaven.edu is my personal email, and they can write me there, and love to connect with where I can be helpful.
Thank you so much, Roger. I'm grateful. This is, like I say, you'll be seeing a few multiple orders from me for some leaders that, as I said, I may sneak it to them so they don't know it came from me.
So they don't know where it came from exactly, because some people have called the book radical, but and in many ways it is, but it really can give you a whole different perspective when you can get there. I didn't have a model to follow. 20 years we figured this out. That's why I wrote the book, and hopefully I pray it's helpful.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, I'm grateful to Roger. It's an amazing thing. People that overplan, they overthink. There's a lot of leaders out there that do that. I'd encourage you to get this book, Opportunity Leadership. Stop planning and start getting results. I'll have the information in the show notes so you'll know where to get it, how to get in touch with Roger. It's a great concept, and I love the way he thinks. And remember, my book, Ideas on a Deadline: How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking. I would encourage you, get a copy right away. This is in many ways, this is a partner book to Roger's book, because it helps you be more nimble, more flexible. Because when you can create the breakthrough ideas you need when you need them, let me tell you, the freedom is just amazing. It will change everything in your career. So, Ideas on a Deadline: How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking. I'd encourage you to do that. Certainly share this episode with leaders who kind of overthink things and overplan things, because this can make a major difference for them. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Rate us if you would. Share it with people, and I'll see you on the next episode.